Hello and a very good morning to all of you. It's great to see you. Welcome to the DGAP morning briefing on geopolitical challenges that we are facing at the moment. Today, we want to discuss about a decisive phase of the war of Russia against Ukraine. We want to zoom in on military and political perspectives for Ukraine and for Russia, and of course do this at a moment that is really quite crucial in this war. The words that can be mentioned here is certainly Bakhmut and the Battle of Bakhmut, but it's also Belgorod, the attacks on Russian soil, as well as, of course, very importantly, the offensive against the counteroffensive against Russia and where it stands at the moment. To do so, we have three excellent speakers. We start with my senior fellow colleague, Rácz. He's a senior fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Following him, we will hear from Alina Frolova. Alina Frolova is the former Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine and a military analyst and really an insider into the military situation in Ukraine. And I don't know why I don't see her now. She was just there a few minutes ago, but perhaps there was a connection problem. I hope she will rejoin very quickly. And then, of course, our own Stefan Meister, who is heading our center for the region at the German Council on Foreign Relations. My name is Wolff, and I'm the director of the German Council on Foreign Relations. I really look forward to this discussion. We want to spend 30 minutes discussing among ourselves in a very interactive way today. And after these 30 minutes, of course, you, our esteemed audience, have a chance to ask questions to our panelists. Without much further ado, Andras, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you to all of you, and thank you for joining us today morning. As the time frame is really short, please allow me to first share a map. The map I usually tend to share, the map produced by the Institute for the Study of War. This map, you see it, right? You do see it. Good, perfect. So this map indicates the situation in Bakhmut or largely around Bakhmut. The gray line indicates the city's administrative border. You see that decisive majority of Bakhmut, basically the city, is taken by Russia. So the battle is not yet over. Fighting is still going on Bakhmut flanks, but the city itself, after nearly 10 months of resistance, has been taken by Russia's forces. The recent Ukrainian counterattacks on the flanks, both in the north and the south, served only the purpose that it allowed Ukrainian defenders to retreat in an organized way, so they could retreat without any kind of larger scale encirclement. Even though Russia planned to celebrate the takeover of Bakhmut, sharing stop, as a major strategic victory, which in fact is not, but this was the Russian intention to present it. But the recent Ukrainian incursion into Belgorod region basically overshadowed that. The interesting element of this incursion is that in terms of size, it wasn't that much significant. This wasn't even the first case when Russian territory was attacked from Ukrainian soil. However, the information component that surrounded this incursion into Belgorod elevated the overall importance of the whole event and basically dominated the Russian information space and still dominating the Russian information space. Apart from the Belgorod incursion, which in fact took over for a short while 3 villages and a minor town, so nothing really big, the interesting element there is that Russia could have used it to escalate the conflict. They could have used it to announce another wave of mobilization or to announce another strengthening of domestic control, but they did not. Instead, Russia has been trying to downplay the whole incident, indicating that this was a major fiasco for Russia's armed forces and Russia's border guards. Apart from that, fighting along the front line is largely static, also due to the bad weather which recently characterized the east and south of Ukraine. Meanwhile, in the air, Russia has continued and actually intensified its air and missile campaign against Ukraine. Unfortunately, this air and missile campaign is taking plenty of victims among the civilian population first, And second, it also indicates that the original assessment that Russia was running critically low on air-launched ammunition turned out to be at least partially false. So Russia apparently still has the resources for attacking nearly the whole of Ukraine's territory, except the western part of the country. Once the counteroffensive starts, it's realistic to expect an even larger, even more intensive Russian air campaign. That's it from me for the start. Thank you.
Wonderful, Andras. I mean, perhaps you can just say a few more words about the counteroffensive. I mean, you talked about Bakhmut being largely taken or perhaps fully taken by Russian forces. But of course, Ukrainian forces have advanced around Bakhmut, and they have presumably also made progress in other parts of the front line. And they have been also quite active destroying infrastructure on Crimea and other supply routes. Can you just give us a 2-minute overview of the counteroffensive?
Certainly. The most important part of the counteroffensive, so namely the attempted breakthrough of Russian lines, has not yet started. What we are seeing today, and actually been watching already for a few weeks, is that Ukraine systematically downgrading Russia's logistical hubs, command and control posts, artillery positions, infrastructural targets behind the front line. So Ukraine is depleting Russia's ability to supply its forces and also to properly command and control its forces. These measures are taken ahead of the counteroffensive. We've seen such things before. This is how Ukraine prepared for takeover of the Kherson region as well. So this is basically the preparations for the counteroffensive, and Ukraine is highly successful in that.
Okay, thank you. That's good to hear that Ukraine is successful in preparing the counteroffensive. Let's now turn to Alina Frolova. Alina, you just told us that you are actually currently in Kiev, and there were 35 missiles, I think, sent, or drones.
Not missiles, drones.
Sent on Kiev, but all shot down. Give us an update on the situation from your perspective.
Well, the situation is really everyone is in expectation of this counteroffensive, and this is good and bad because I would say that we should speak not about counteroffensive, but about summer-autumn campaign probably, because there are some plans. They will be realized, implemented, and they can fit in our expectations or doesn't fit in our expectations. Yes, and I think that we need to think and to work with different scenarios of how liberation will go on, not to have the very high expectations, which will afterwards can influence the decision making on support in Europe or something else like political actions. Because actually war is war. I mean, there are a lot of factors which can influence this or that development. No one can specifically say that there is a direction which was already chosen for counteroffensive. We still have a few options, and the more we see developments on the front line, the more options we have from the a main target direction and all the other. I'm absolutely agree with Andras about shaping operation, which obviously already started. And the shaping operation actually goes in few directions. It takes Crimea, covers Crimea, and covers the eastern part. And with Belgrade operation, which we saw a few days ago, which officially is not Ukrainian, not done by Ukrainians, but still it demonstrates that there could be some very unusual solutions for counteroffensive. Yes, because the task of the command is to spread the attention of military command and spread the forces of Russian all over, and to choose to make a right choice within. So I think that all the analysts should work not only in expecting the counteroffensive, because this is very short-term planning, but more developing the scenarios of the future. Whatever the results of short-term counteroffensive will be. And I also think that we need to speak about Crimea, about liberation of Crimea, about status of Crimea, because there are some kind of voices which are rising up in different countries around the future of it. and Ukraine has a clear vision about this future. And I think that we also need to speak about the future of Russia, how we would like to see Russia, because otherwise in 10, 15 or 20 years, we will again face the loop of the oldest situation.
Yes, indeed. Many topics to discuss, but let me just ask you a follow-up question on Crimea and sort of the next steps, really. There are really very different views about how successful the offensive or the summer operation will be. Some, like former US General Ben Hodges, are already predicting that Crimea will be in the hands of Ukraine by the end of the year. Others are much, much more pessimistic. I mean, give us a sense about where you see the Crimea issue and sort of the next steps towards Crimea, because Crimea is, of course, still quite some distance. You first have to break through to the Sea of Azov, I guess. How do you see that whole topic and that situation?
Well, what the Ben Hodges is saying, and I'm absolutely supporting him, that this is that's possible. I mean, that again, if we do the first step of counteroffensive on the south and cut the supplies to Crimea from the mainland and split the units, split the forces of Russia on two parts, from this point we can reach with long-range missiles, which we already obtained, and with jets, which we already will obtain in the nearest future. We can reach the Crimean Bridge, and then to make an logistical isolation of Crimea, which makes the task of the releasing of Crimea much, much easier. And so technically it's possible. Then again, what we said, that we will see how the course of war will go. And I don't close this issue yet for this year, I mean. However, the Ukrainians we do not discuss here how fast we will release Crimea. We discuss that we release Crimea and what we do next. We do a lot of planning now, how to reintegrate Crimea, how to enter Crimea with all the forces which we have, how to plan these forces, starting from the military to the educational, to social, and all the other. Because Crimea was completely separated for all these years, and starting from the administrative reform, which didn't happen, to many, many other things which we do plan. And we do planning about the Black Sea, because we do understand our weakness on maritime component, and we just rely on establishing alliances, and we do work on this. So we do all the preparatory work to be ready to liberation.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Very, very important developments. And of course, you evoked the issue of Russia. And so let me turn to my colleague, Stefan Meister, one of Germany's leading Russia experts, to give us a sense of how he sees the situation also in Russia. Stefan.
Yeah, thank you, Gundram. Good morning also from my side. Happy to be again in this format. I always enjoy this discussion. Just a couple of words on Russia. The creeping mobilization is going on in Russia. We have now this electronic mobilization. That means if you get an email that you are mobilized, you are already in the system, and you have to go to the administrations for this. So I think there is really they're trying to close the gaps also for people who are trying not to get mobilized, just to get really everybody. I think we discussed this already. The regime is consolidated with the war. I would still argue this. It has created a lock-in effect with well-functioning propaganda. Maybe people also want to believe in this propaganda, and the policy of fear. Everybody who is in opposition or criticizes the government can be immediately jailed or disappear in camps. So I think you have this huge system of camps which are still existing. And not only Wagner, but also the Russian military, they have emptied the jails for mobilization, also thrown in people in not only into Bakhmut. So that creates also space in the jails for more people coming in. I think that has several effects. nobody in the elite is allowed to leave. All technocrats and liberal elites serve the survival of the regime and the economy. It's becoming a more difficult year this year than it was last year, but still, I think income is sufficient. And soon we will see, I'm really expecting this, that it will become more difficult to leave the country for nearly everybody, but especially for those groups who are important also for the economy, for the military-industrial complex. So really they need labor force. We should be, that's maybe my final bigger point, we should be very careful in discussing a split of the regime, or that there are new actors who challenge Putin. I'm here very skeptical. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, is first of all a social media phenomenon, in my opinion, then a real relevant political player in Russian politics. He has no resources except social media and Wagner, which has been weakened very much, lost a lot of soldiers, and he depends much on the Russian military and the state and their willingness to spend money. So he needs the money from the Russian state and the Russian military. He depends here very much. The whole discussion on Prigozhin distracts, in my opinion, from other key actors like Prime Minister Mishustin and the first Deputy Chief of Staff of the presidential administration, Sergei Kiriyenko, who has increased his power position and is a key actor also for a new ideology and for education of young people, and is also responsible for the occupied territories. He's a very good manager. He was a liberal in the past, and now he's a key person also in operating the whole system. And neither Prigozhin nor Kadyrov play or will play a crucial role in Russian politics, and they all depend on the goodwill of Putin, who protects them in the end. And if he would not do it, I think other actors would try to kick them out of the system. So I stop here maybe at this point.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Stefan. So very clear picture on how strong and consolidated the Putin regime is currently. But of course, you haven't said much about the interplay of the war and the stability of the regime if the Ukrainian offensive was to be more successful. I know that you also were just in the US. I think perhaps you focus on that and you want to go back to that question, how the US sees the conflict at the moment, but perhaps we do that in the second round. And you spent just one more minute really talking us through sort of the interplay between different scenarios. I mean, what if the Ukrainian offensive was to be quite successful now, and Ukrainian soldiers were reaching the Azov Sea and were in a position to really attack Crimea. And since I have the word now, let me just emphasize on the economic situation in Russia. We have just published several pieces on the sanctions, which you can see on our website. One on the effect of the oil price cap, where we see in the first 4 months actually a significant fall in revenues for the Russian state. So also there is some pressure that is perhaps not decisive, but is one of several pressure points that the West has, and that certainly makes the life of the Putin regime and the military apparatus somewhat more difficult. So please go to our website for these papers. But Stefan, I mean, just give us a sense of sort of the dynamics of the politics in Russia when things would go worse for Russia, even worse than now.
Well, I think it's important that Russia is losing the war. And I think that's, for me, the entry point also for a different dynamic in Russia itself. And I don't see at the moment any other option. I don't see that the sanctions really hit them in a way in short and middle term, and I don't see any other elements. At the same time, we should not overestimate what it really means. I don't think the regime will collapse just when they lose Crimea, whatever it means, losing Crimea. So I still think we are far away from this, even if I understand the logic. Drying out, cutting off a supply. And so on. But I would be very careful to say then the regime is collapsing. There will be a fight among the different interest groups. I think it has still enough resources. It has a very well-functioning repression apparatus also for inside. It still has created disloyalties. And I would not expect, as many as discussed this, that then when Crimea falls, the regime will suddenly erodate in a way. But I think it might become even more closed, even more aggressive in a way. It might even distract into other post-Soviet regions. For instance, in the Caucasus, it has built up schemes also of circumventing sanctions with Central Asian states, Caucasian states, with Turkey.
Right.
Very close relationship. Also, Russia supported very much the re-election of Erdogan. So I think it has created options also for itself, alternative options. And I think that will help the regime also to survive longer than we maybe hope for.
Wonderful. So time is running faster than I was hoping. But let me perhaps go to you again, Alina, and get your reactions to some of what you've heard. So quite a pessimistic view on Russia. Also, I would say more pessimistic than you were probably on the ability of Ukraine to really push through and get close to Crimea. I mean, there were many points. Perhaps you can just pick 2 or 3 and react to them. That would be really wonderful.
Well, yeah, you know that I know that there are some doubts about the capabilities of Ukraine, but we live with these doubts already for 1 year. We started from the doubts of being alive now. But we're still here and we are still winning. And when I'm asked about the strategic battle of Bakhmut, it's a little bit funny from the frontline point of view and military planning, because Bakhmut is not a strategic point. It's just like a concentration of Russian propaganda, nothing more. Yeah, we have a champagne there, like a huge storage of champagne, and probably this is the most strategic issue about Bakhmut. But the issue about Russia, I think that there is a huge threat that the Western countries still go in some trap with Russia planning, like starting the discussion about the future, about the liberal Russia. Because should we take out our sentiments and some kind of all these layers of the propaganda which was delivered by Russians for many, many years, we will see that Russia was never liberal, and it will never be liberal in such a, like if it stays like this empire. I'm not discussing the splitting of Russia on few countries, because this is for Ukraine. This is of course the optimal way, but we cannot plan it. I mean that this is something which we can somehow influence, but can plan. But what we can plan our policy towards the developments in Russia. And of course, if we will have a Prigozhin or next Putin on this place, the situation is quite clear. However, should we have some kind of Navalny on this place, the situation is not clear, because I'm afraid that this is the next step which Western countries are ready to accept and to go to normalization of relation, which would be a greatest mistake, because it will lead just to the new escalation. And I think that this is discussion point which we need to focus on. We need to discuss how dangerous is like a perception of Russia as a potential liberal and democratic country. We need to take out these like expectations and work with the planning and work with the strategies, which will include Russia as aggressive imperial state in any case, with more liberal power, with less liberal power. And this will influence on our planning. This will influence on their capabilities, on what type of weapons they will develop, and what kind of policy they will do. And I think that our planning should be based only on the situation that Russia is aggressive and imperial state, and how we will deal with this in Black Sea, how we will activate the general approach of the Black Sea nations to this situation, including Turkey, how we will deal with this from the point of view of NATO threatening Russia to NATO and NATO countries and continuing this pressure, how we will deal with Moldova and Belarus. This is principal issues. So I think that the planning should be focused on this now, if we're speaking about the future Russia.
Wonderful, thank you. I mean, the history of Russia certainly suggests that Russia is an imperial power and continues to be one. But of course, we will see after the war. I think an element that I'd like to bring to the discussion before I open up still is, however, about Ukraine itself. I mean, Ukraine, I think there's two really relevant discussions for Ukraine now, especially in a situation if there's some sort of a ceasefire or whatever, which is basically NATO membership and EU membership. Both would have major effects on the country, but also, by the way, I think on Russia itself. The EU membership and the prospects of EU membership, the growth prospects that come from accession to the single market are tremendous forces showing that a different way is possible, and will also serve as a strong, different alternative in Russia's perception. So in that sense, perhaps there can be some optimism if Ukraine gets a relatively fast track accession to the EU and the NATO protection with it. I mean, it will very quickly turn Ukraine into a relatively prosperous country. I mean, not that it goes overnight, but let's say if you take a 10-year perspective, it makes a really big difference. And I think that has also effects on Russia and Russian civil society and Russian discussions. But perhaps you want to say one word on just on this NATO and EU membership bit, which I think is really important for your country.
Yeah, just one remark. It won't influence Russians. They see Europe, they now travel over Europe, they see the perspective, it doesn't influence on them. And it won't, nor their civil society. As for Ukraine, NATO and EU membership, of course, we do need NATO because we had already some kind of verbal guarantees of our security. We don't trust it. We do understand that the only deterrence regarding Ukraine can be nuclear deterrence and obligations, not guarantees, but obligations. And the only alliance which have now, so we have like a few alternatives, or United States directly will give us the not the promise, but the guarantees, or I don't know, UK or NATO. Yes, we do understand that the NATO is only closest option to do it. And that is why we will work over the Ukraine joining NATO. And we have quite a big perspective when the land operation will be ended up and legally territory of Ukraine will be clear from Russians. We will have the biggest and the strongest and the most talented army in European continent. And for NATO not to accept Ukraine, it would be just a very strange decision. Because we multiply capabilities of NATO, and we can build up the defense systems and security systems in the whole region and influence many Baltics, Mediterraneans. So that's I even cannot imagine what they can think about if they don't take Ukraine into NATO. So everyone do understand that we need to work with the being ready, so-called Finland 2.0 variant, when you completely integrated in all the system, completely, and only political decision is made. And this is our task now, to have this complete integration with all the systems, situational awareness, troops, interoperability, so on and so forth, which we are almost there already, yes? So, because in many pieces we're already interconnected. And that's about NATO. About EU, yes, we do need EU. We do need EU because we do understand that we are now highly dependent from money which are granted, invested, whatever, into Ukraine. And I think that we need also to demonstrate to EU, which we do, and I think we do successfully, that Ukraine has a capability for fast growth. And the money which will be given to Ukraine, it's not granted money, it's investment. And we will have a boosting economy here with talented people, with a lot of working force, and with this transparent approach to the development of the economy. And I'm absolutely, here in Ukraine, no one is worrying about what will be after the war, because we know ourselves. and we know how hard we can work, and we will restore everything. If you come to Kiev now, you will be surprised. I mean that we have multiple restaurants working, cafes. You have shutdown of the light. Okay, we'll work with candles and cook outside on the street. It didn't stop the economic activity in the country. We need sea to make the transportation. We need security to make the normal land transportation. All the other we can handle. And I'm absolutely sure that access to EU will bring benefits to Ukraine, because we will have faster growth because of access to money, but it also will benefit EU because you will have here boosting economy with the huge possibilities to build up the business, starting from the defense industry to agriculture and all the other, and switching to the this investment discussion more than to support or assistance discussion will also give more arguments to those who trying to promote our ideas.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. The half an hour is over, and we have lots of questions already in the chat. But also, of course, please do raise your hand, and we like to bring you into the video and like to get you to ask questions directly. But let me just so please do raise your virtual hand so that I can see you. But let me just direct one question at you, Stefan, which is from our colleague Nikolai von Schöpf on Crimea and the special importance for Russia that Crimea has. I mean, it's historic. I guess it's important for them in terms of national pride, but it's also important in terms of the actual ports, military ports, marine ports, Sevastopol and others. And so it is really quite a crucial place for Russia at the moment. So how do you see this Crimea issue? Just to enlarge a little bit on that. And related, there was a second question also on the issue of nuclear deterrence, and to which you replied already in the chat, and the nuclear option of Russia, and why you think it's quite unlikely that Russia will resort to weapons of mass destruction. Perhaps you can just take those 2 points, and then Andras, I come also to you with some questions, I'm sure.
Since we also wanted to be a little bit interactive, I just want to react to 2 points Alina made, I think, which are important. So I think there's really a lack of a discussion about a Russia strategy. I think it's really very important, and we really need a short, middle, and long-term strategy for Russia. I completely agree here with her. I think the empire is collapsing now. So I think we see a disintegration of the empire. There are two empires. Yeah, I think there's the big empire and there is the internal empire in a way. So I'm talking here about the big empire, and I agree also that Russia has not really liberal traditions or very limited liberal traditions, but I think only deterrence cannot be the policy. So I think deterrence is for me short and middle term, but in long term, you have to reintegrate a different Russia into Europe, and we have to have incentives for change of Russia, because if this is not taking place, then it will come back and will try again to destroy. So I think this change in Russia has to come. And I would never say it's impossible. So I think it's for every country, it's possible also to change. This society is not ready yet. I completely agree. It's a colonial society. It's imperial society. But I think this war and losing the war will also change Russia in long term. And I think we have to work on this. So I think I just wanted to make this point. Now, on Crimea, yes, sure. Crimea is seen as Russia, yeah, and it's seen as from the Russian elites, and it's seen as historical land in a way. And I think Putin is really crazy about Crimea. So I think it's ideological, it's crucial, and militarily, I think it's very important. Sevastopol, protecting power in the Black Sea region. So I think it's very, very important. And losing Crimea would really have a huge impact on Russia. I would agree here, and they will do a lot of not to lose it. Yeah. So, but I don't think they will use. I think less and less they will use the nuclear option. I think it's very clear from China that they don't want to see this, and Russia is more and more dependent on China. And we don't see also this messaging anymore like it was in the past. We don't see preparations. I think Andras made also this point in the chat for it. And I would be very skeptical at the moment. I think it's really more about the information campaign to threaten us than really using the nuclear option, because it really could shift also the support of India, of other countries, including China for Russia. So that's why I would be here very, very, very skeptical.
Wonderful. So let me turn to Andras on perhaps a more hardcore military question, which is about the situation in air combat. There was this question by Volkmar Hart in the chat. There's a lot of discussion now about delivery of additional fighter jets, also long-range missiles. Ukraine has received from the UK Storm Shadow missiles. Mr. Kiesewetter from the Defense Committee in the German Bundestag has called on Germany to also deliver long-range missiles. Give us an overview of how you see the situation in the air combat space. How crucial is it? How important are these deliveries? Will they really make a difference? Will they come too late? How do you assess the whole situation there?
Thank you. When it comes to aircraft deliveries, one needs to be very realistic about the time frames. So even now the decision is taken to supply Ukraine with F-16s. It will take a lot of time until the Ukrainian pilots are trained, the maintenance crew are trained, the airports are prepared. So this is a long process. We're not going to see F-16s fighting during the summer or the autumn offensives. The new long-range missiles delivered, these are done in order to increase Ukraine's ground attack capabilities. Most of the flight sorties, most of the aircrafts are used for ground attack, including the fighters. So basically as launch platforms. And Ukraine has been remarkably successful in integrating Western-made missile systems into Ukrainian aircrafts. I mean, already last year, we've seen that Ukraine managed to integrate the HARM, the anti-radar missile, into Soviet-made fighter jets. Many people thought that this was outright impossible. Since the Ukraine has been happily using this. Same is going to happen with the Storm Shadow. The interesting element about the Storm Shadow missiles is the range, more than 200 kilometers, which enables Ukraine to hit basically any targets, any Russian targets on the occupied territories, including the city of Luhansk, which was so far out of range for Ukraine's artillery and air force. So these long-range missiles, one more thing here. Ukraine already had the capability of hitting targets far away, 150 to 200 kilometers, with the Krim cruise missiles. But those were available in very small numbers. Now the Storm Shadow will be available in much bigger numbers. So the story is not about Ukraine being able to hit these targets further away, but the story is that Ukraine will be able to hit more targets further away. So it's the numbers that matter. Plus, of course, also the symbolic value. Now with these long-range missiles, Ukraine is able to cover nearly the whole of the occupied territories, except perhaps the very southern edge of the Crimea. One more thing about the Crimea, when we speak about the perspectives of liberating the Crimea, one needs to be aware of the sheer size of the territory and also of the population. I mean, Crimea has a population of more than nearly 2 million people. So some kind of a blockade, like we've seen at the liberation of Kherson. When Kherson was blockaded, there were how many? 30,000 people in the city. If Crimea would be blockaded, that means 2 million. That has a major humanitarian aspect as well. Plus, the city of Sevastopol alone is 300,000 and has been fortified basically for centuries. So when one tries to assess the military perspectives of liberating the Crimea, size and population really does matter here, particularly when one thinks about the longer term operation. So this is not going to be an easy run at all.
Alina, there was one question on the prospects of a more frozen conflict where no side really advances, as seems to have been the case in the last couple of months. Can you walk us through that scenario and what it would entail and how likely you consider it to be?
Yeah, sure. Just like short remarks on previous discussion, and I'm absolutely agree that the liberation of Crimea is a difficult task. However, as we saw that all the Russian troops and forces, when they see the isolation threat, they usually live in the point. So out of these 2 million in Crimea, 800,000 or something will try to leave. So we will have much easier situation with the population and all the other. This is the issue of planning and military approach. And about the nuclear threat, just one remark which I'm always giving. Ukrainians are not afraid of this. We have multiple polls that even in case of use of the tactical nuclear weapons, 86% of Ukrainians said we are not ready to negotiate, even in case of usage. So from the blackmail or pressing point of view of Russia, it won't play any role. Unfortunately, it will play a role with losses, but not with the main course of war. About the fraud in the conflict, this is not possible. Ukrainians on political and just like a usual population level, we do understand that or we win or we die, because like a frozen conflict will mean just like a long-lasting dying for Ukrainian nation, because we will lose an economy, we won't have the possibility to enter the EU, NATO, we will have more and more frustration from some other countries on support, and we will lose in forces all the time. Russia still has prevailing forces, so everyone, military, common political leadership, and usual people do understand that the worst case scenario for us is frozen conflict. That is why no one is considering it. I mean, that there is like a common unity that this is not the case for Ukrainians. We prefer to have bigger losses, but we won't let the frozen conflict happen, because we've been living in this situation for 8 years, and it led just to next round of war. Should we agree for frozen conflict, it will lead in 5 years to the next action of war, when we will be much more weaker than we are now, because we will have losses, we will have less economy, and so on and so forth. So for Ukraine, this is not the case. That's why we do not discuss it.
Wonderful. So I want to turn to Stefan, but before I do so, I do want to reply myself to one question by James Willie on the prospect of joining the EU and what would it mean for access of Ukrainian agriculture to the EU market and conversely EU manufacturing to the Ukrainian market. I mean, I think the first point to note here is that, of course, first the war has to end. And then it will take an accession process. And at the end of the accession process, when Ukraine is a full member, of course, all the 4 freedoms and the integrity of the single market will have to be part of the full membership. Now, that is an issue in the agricultural sector because the EU common agricultural policy is highly inefficient and extremely expensive. So it is, I think, in my view, certainly an area where domestic reform, I mean, EU level reform had been on the agenda well before we were talking about Ukraine, because it is just so much money that is spent on a highly ineffective sector and a very small sector. But it's a very difficult area to reform. And so my view on this would be, ideally, it should be part of a reform package. But I really think the important message here is that we want to give Ukraine the path towards full EU membership, because that really is what matters. It's a strategic priority for the EU. It would be a huge benefit for the EU on so many different dimensions, including access to the market, but I mean, so many also strategic dimensions. And so I really think we shouldn't sort of overplay this agricultural issue. It will be an issue, but it's not the only issue that, it's not an issue that cannot be overcome. And I did want to ask Stefan one question on the perspective of the global South on this conflict. Johannes Ahlefeld is asking this question very late. US think tanks seem to realize that the framing of the war as a contest, democracy against autocracy, is counterproductive, and that it needs serious engagement in the global South to change the perception that this is a colonial conflict in Europe, which is irrelevant to them. What can we do to counter the Russian and Chinese strategic engagement and their anti-Western narrative? Any ideas on that one?
Yes, sure. I'm really critical about this Biden approach of polarizing between autocracies and democracies. We have a lot of hybrid regimes in the world who won't be neither part of a Western camp nor of a Russia-China camp. And I think this just pushes exactly these countries in the arms of the other side. So, and I think it's really crucial to understand that we will live in a more fragmented world. We will have more hybrid regimes. It will be really more multipolar, and this kind of polarization is not helpful. I think it's really good that Ukraine itself is now increasingly outreaching also to key countries in Africa, in South America, in Asia. I think Russia is so successful with its narratives on this war because it presents itself as the Soviet Union was a kind of fighting against the imperial West, and capitalism and so on. And I think it presents itself as a non-colonial power, even if it is itself a colonial power. And I think that's really highly problematic. How we really ignored also these trends where China was investing in the last 10 years. In infrastructure, in also in discourses, in elites, in media, in Africa and in other countries. So I think we have to engage much more with these countries. We have to be much more on equal footing also with them. It's not only about countering Russia's narratives, but it's also taking these countries more serious, being more present also in other parts of the region, that they benefit also from economic relations. And then I think it's really also supporting Ukraine with its more diplomatic and also engagement capacities to explain also what this war is about. So I think it's really accepting a much more fragmented world and really engaging also more with these countries on different levels.
Wonderful. We have a live question by Boris Ginsburg. Which is always nice to see a person asking a question, not just the chat. So Boris, thanks for asking your question. You're still muted.
My name is Boris Ginsburg. I'm a doctoral researcher at the Institute for East European Studies at the Freie University in Berlin. Ms. Frolova, I have a question for you. Besides the extremes, win or die, as you said, I think that the reality is that we are heading into, let's say, a stalemate between both conflict sides. And I would like to ask you, do you think, and the stalemate, like, it's like the right moment, like as Zartman would say, and as soon as this right moment in the conflict is reached, peace negotiations become more realistic. I would like to know, do you think that the Ukrainian society, from your point of view, is ready to accept certain compromises which will have to be made during negotiations? And do you think that in such a case, the Ukrainian leadership would politically survive such a scenario? Thank you.
No, Ukrainian society obviously is not ready to have some compromises. We lost too much already, and this is very emotional and personal losses for each of us. So every one of us lost at least friends, many relatives, houses, life, and all the other. So it should be for something, if there are so many losses, it should be for something. It cannot be for like just the freezing the conflict again, and in 10 years to start this again and again. So Ukrainian society, 97% or 96% saying no negotiations, no compromises on territories. So let's say we describe the first stage of victory as the releasing of all the territories. This is must have before we are not ready to negotiate. Then the negotiations can be done on the tribunal, like justice and compensations. This is the floor for negotiations. But also the important issue is that the negotiations is possible if both sides are ready to negotiate, which we don't see from Russia. They are not ready to negotiate also. Or one side is under the pressure of such a strength that it agrees to accept such some conditions which are not favorable to them. Ukraine is not under such a pressure that we are ready to accept some kind of conditions. Russia possibly still not also in this situation. So there is no floor for negotiations now. And that is why the stalemate which you're describing, again, if we see within 2 months there is a stalemate, if we see within the course of war of 1.5 years, there is like just some operational period, maybe in 2 months, as you will say, okay, that was like a period of stalemate. Now we have a period of offensive. Now, then we will have again the period of calmness. We cannot look at this situation as the like an established situation. This is not something which is for years, planned for years, and this is not something which will stay for years, because there is a clear preparation to some military actions from Ukrainian side. And in some period, situation will be changed. So this is not like we tried 1 year and cannot move. This is not that period which we can say that this is a stalemate yet. And I think that this is again the coming back to my example to Bakhmut. For half a year, I was asked to by all the media to comment Bakhmut situation. That is Ukraine losing in Bakhmut? I mean that Bakhmut is an extremely small city. Ukraine is not losing. It's like a coming and go, and this is tactical or operational changes on the front line. But this is not something which is principally influence the course of war. The course of war can be influenced by increasing of Russian operations twice, for example, or by a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive. But I won't evaluate now situation as a stalemate, not at all.
Thank you, Alina. So let me bring in Uschi Eid and then Klaus Wittmann. We take those two together.
I just want to agree with Mr. Meister's analysis when it comes to the narrative, that we are following the narrative. There is East against West. Now, based on that, I would like to ask, how do you see the initiative of Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president, who has announced that together with 5 other African presidents, some call it a so-called B team, because there are countries which are very, very small and in the international context not very vocal. He has announced to go to Moscow and to Kiev. Can anybody comment on that?
Wonderful. Thank you. Klaus Wittmann.
Good morning. I want to agree with Alina Frolova that between the aim to destroy a nation and its fight for survival, there is no compromise imaginable. And in that context, I would like to ask, I have the impression that in Western societies, also in ours, there is much blindness towards Putin's long-term aims. And there is talk about 2 warring countries, and one gets used to the war. Don't you think that the utterly criminal character of the war, regarding the use ad bellum, regarding the use in bello, should be highlighted much more strongly and with more details, for instance, about the deported children and atrocities of that kind, and also better explanation of the awareness that should Putin win, the cost for all of us would be much higher than what we have to, quotation marks, endure now in terms of inflation and energy costs, etc.
Yes, Alina, perhaps you want to start, and then we have a moment for Stefan and Andras, and we close.
About all the peaceful initiatives like mediators, we accept everything. I mean that we are in a situation where any help would be accepted. However, again, you cannot mediate between the two parties, none of which is ready to negotiate in this situation. I don't think that African countries will make a change. However, the more countries are involved, the better. And as for information delivery to Western countries, I think that whole Ukrainian society is working to deliver this information. I mean, this is not only governmental efforts, all kind of NGOs, everyone who is dealing with these atrocities, we do deliver this information. I think that there is quite a big flood of information about different topics, including children, including really the intention of Putin. And this is coming back to frozen conflict. The task of Putin is to destroy Ukrainian nation. I mean, taking part of the territory, he won't complete this task, and that's why he won't he won't stop with doing what he's doing. So, and I think that there is enough information. Yeah, it can be more. Yes, of course it can be more. The issue is that we still don't think in think tanks and expert communities. We still don't see. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes,
we still don't see the deep analysis of mistakes making before in strategies and planning, why it was made, and how you perceive Russia. I think that the one piece of work need to be done is on your side, when you should rethink your perception of Russia, your perception of the common world, all the security systems. I do understand this is difficult because you all grow up as experts and professionals in one frame, and that's very difficult to destroy this frame and start from beginning. But I think it's need to be done. And when you open your eyes and will do the analysis from the scratch, you will see who is Putin, you will see who are Russians, you will see who are Russian opposition and liberals, and you will see then possible ways of speaking to Russia or do not speaking to Russia and planning your strategies. I think this is the issue.
Yes, indeed. And if I can just say in that context, there was a very good interview with Senator McCain, I think back in 2014 or 15, in which he very clearly stated that nothing provokes Russia more than weakness. Nothing provokes Putin more than weakness. And certainly the German political establishment has been complacent and in parts may still be complacent, but I would say there is some shift, but has been certainly complacent until 24 of February about the actual threat that Russia poses. And that's all the more astonishing in a situation where Russian troops were in Berlin only 30 years ago and were supporting a very oppressive regime called East Germany, in East Germany. So we have a short memory of that history, and we haven't been really thinking carefully about the risk that Russia poses to all of our societies. And in a sense, I think I want to also echo the point that you made that, and I think Stefan made that point, that if Ukraine were to lose, I think Klaus Wittmann made that point, if Ukraine were to lose, the cost in terms of security, in terms of economics, in terms of humanitarian dimension for the West would be dramatic. And so that's clearly not an option. And that's why it's so important that we support Ukraine as much as is possible. And I think we are doing that. We can always debate what needs to be done more, but certainly we at the German Council on Foreign Relations have been throughout these last 15 months extremely supportive of the Ukrainian efforts to defend themselves. And so thank you so much, Alina Frolova, for joining us today and for giving your insights. And thank you so much, Andras and Stefan. Time is unfortunately flying, as always, very quickly, but I think we got a lot of ground covered. And so I'm really grateful to all of you and also to our esteemed audience for the wonderful questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you. Slava Ukraina.
Героям слава.